Hello, and welcome to Movies We Dig, the podcast about film, antiquity, and everything in between. I'm Christy Vogler.
I'm Elijah Fleming.
And I'm Colin McCormick.
And today, we're taking a small break from archaeology to tackle one of our other favorite topics, retellings of Greek myth. That's right, we're getting a little chaotic by discussing Netflix's new hit series, KAOS. As you might know, this is a British mythological black comedy television series created by Charlie Covell. To help us wrestle with this adaptation is the lovely Amy Pistone, who is an associate professor of classical civilizations at Gonzaga University. She's also a member of the Women's Classical Caucus and co-chair of the Classics and Social Justice Group. Welcome back to the podcast, Amy.
Thank you so much for having me. I am so excited. I just like a peek behind the scenes, watched one episode of KAOS and like in all caps emailed all of you to say like, if someone hasn't called dibs on KAOS, can I please talk about KAOS? So yeah. I am like beyond excited to talk about this.
Yeah, and then my response to you is like, well, funny story, because I don't know if like we'll necessarily point this out to listeners, but we're hoping to do our first live show at a conference, and this is one of the shows we were thinking about talking about, and Amy and I will both be at CAMUS, hopefully on a different panel. So if we don't talk about everything we want to today, we'll get another crack at it, hopefully. So
excellent.
Yeah. All right. And I guess we can just dig into it because this is a brand new series. I have a few plot notes, but we'll get into it more. Basically, the story revolves around three humans as they discover their connection to each other and a long-standing ancient prophecy. Love prophecy. And then they have to deal with a few Olympian gods along the way. Not too many. We're just given a small little taste so far. And of course, we have Jeff Goldblum playing Zeus, which I kind of thought after Thor Ragnarok. Excellent choice. So yes. I was very on board with that. And yeah, we'll start with our guest of honor, Amy. Do you dig it?
I dig it so much. I cannot even tell you. Like I was super excited after one episode and then even more excited as I finished off all of the other episodes. And I have had some students who binged it like immediately after it came out. And I've been telling them like, don't spoil anything until I finish it. And so, yeah, I have been bursting. It's probably worth noting that there are probably definitely going to be a lot of spoilers in this because there are definitely there are a lot of like reveals and developments and twists and all kinds of things like that. And so, yeah, that's probably worth noting in advance. But yeah, I dig it like times 1,000. I'm so into this.
Yeah, listeners, if you haven't seen the show yet and don't want it spoiled, you should probably go do something else first.
Unfortunately, yeah.
Yeah.
I want to throw it to Colin because like Elijah and I did a nice like halfway break between which I wanted to binge it. I wasn't capable of at the time. Colin did though. So Colin, how does it feel to have binged the TV series?
so to take us back to the far off date of Monday, or today's Wednesday when we're recording, and I realized basically on Monday that we needed to record on Wednesday, and I hadn't watched it at all over the weekend when I maybe should have. And I got home on Monday and I kind of made the promise to myself that I would watch half of it. And I got to like 4 episodes and it was still early enough in the evening and I kept going. And then I got to 6 episodes out of 8 and I looked at the clock and it was only 11 p.m. So I just said, "F it, we roll," and just powered through. So I watched all 8 episodes in a single continuous binge. Yeah.
That is a glowing review from Colin.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to be, I'll be the negative Nancy in the room. I'm a little cooler on it. I think I kind of left a note where I think there's discrete parts of this that I really like. I like many of the performances. I like many of the ideas that they're dealing with. I like the set design and the costuming and the whole look of the whole thing. And everything about this is things like I want to like it so bad. But at the end of the day, there's just a missing thing. And I wrote just in my notes where like, is this total less than the sum of its parts? And that's where it kind of fell for me in a way that I can't even point to something specific that I just absolutely dislike. But at the end, I think it maybe is just there's something about the overall plot that just didn't captivate me.
As you binged it for 8 hours straight.
Maybe that was part of it too. And I'm gonna actually come in with maybe not a hot take, a cool take, but like I was not crazy about Jeff Goldblum in this.
Really? You are the first person I've heard say anything but like, oh, Jeff Goldblum, what a great role. What a great casting choice. Like, you are the first person I've heard be like, nah, don't think so.
No, it was just, there was something, it was neither here nor there about it where I'm not sure, like, it wasn't threatening enough. It was too idiosyncratic, too Jeff Goldblum-y. There was just something that it was actually kind of this was like sort of was one of my least favorite Jeff Goldblum performances. And you mentioned the Thor Ragnarok where he's the, what is it? The collector? He's not the collector. What's his name?
Oh, he's,
the something-er. It's another one of these. Yeah. And like, I loved him in that role, and it's been part of a larger kind of Jeff Goldblum renaissance as we're getting like this late stage Jeff Goldblum, and he's coming back in a big way. But this is kind of, it felt like he was just kind of
Grandmaster.
The Grandmaster.
I forgot. It was killing me.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
But yeah, that's where I'm at.
Okay. All right. Lige.
I am for once not the most stick in the mud person. I have been really digging this. I have had a lot of fun. I think it's really weird, and I feel like this is a story that hasn't been told quite this way before. So I just appreciate some of the weird novelties that it's kind of trying out. The one thing I don't like is the way it ends, and we'll get there. But I wish it had just been a single series cohesive thing.
That's fair.
And I thought Jeff Goldblum was so fun. I thought he was terrifyingly, like, lazily cruel and just, like...
shooting the ball boys
on
was
edge.
my favorite.
That's so funny. So, yeah, I felt on edge, like, just, like, watching him. So,
well, that was one of the... I'm sorry, I don't mean to I know, like, we haven't heard, but Christy,
no,
I just, like,
I
think it almost felt like it was sort of, I think the thing that really didn't work for Colin is actually one of the things that I did like about it's not quite anything, right? Like he's cruel but then like weird and then petty and like doesn't understand that Prometheus isn't his best friend and Prometheus hates him. And I think that kind of uneven tone actually for me like really captures something about how I think Greek myth, these gods like contain multitudes, and sometimes they're scary and sometimes they're like petty and sometimes they're whatever. And I think that kind of uneven tone in his behavior was actually something that sort of did work for me. Like I felt like it kind of encapsulated something about like the general, I don't know, vibe, spirit of how Greek mythology sometimes works, like the weirdness of it and the ability to have like a lot of different genres all wrapped up inside of it.
To go on with that point, and I love that the title itself is KAOS for that, because, when we talk about Greek mythology, we really think of these like long narratives, right? Of like this and this person, Zeus, and like this is Zeus's whole thing. But really, those are all just little different stories from different places and different times that we've put together to talk about this person. And like maybe what the show was doing successfully was kind of showing how disjointed those stories could end up being. These gods can't be everything that myth has said they're going to be because it doesn't actually feel right when we do that. Mm-hmm. So maybe that's a little bit where the off-putting element is, but it works at the same time. Yeah,
I think the idea that like, because these stories don't cohere, and that's one of the things that I think is really... when I teach Greek myth and students kind of want to know like, okay, but like, what's the version they really believed, or what's the real version? Mm-hmm. Like, well, all of them and none of them. Like it's, that is just such a different way of thinking about stories where we're like, we're generally in such a like, what is the canonical version of this? And just the way that we tend to watch science fiction and like comic book movies and things, like they're so concerned with having that internal consistency and that like, and if something happens,
I blame Jesus. I'm joking, but I'm kind of not, because I really think like a care and a deep concern with like canon and orthodox and what's in and what's out, I think really is like, it's a part of modern storytelling and science fiction, but I kind of want to draw some kind of line to like religious.
And like this world feels like, what if Jesus didn't happen? is kind of what this feels like.
Yeah.
The world, we could, I mean, Christy.
Okay.
Wait.
Christy,
Before
did you
we
dig
get
it?
too big, Christy, did you dig it?
So I have to say, and this involves a spoiler, I emailed you all being like, all right, Wednesday we're recording. I'm only 4 episodes in, and I'm going to quote myself. So we'll all meet up tomorrow evening to talk about how adorable we find Dionysus and Dennis, the little black kitten, yeah? I am 4 episodes in, and if anything happens to that kitten, I will torch this entire series. Just saying. So something happened to Dennis, and there was some torching at the end. So I feel a little like Cassandra.
Yeah.
Another character who is in this, incidentally.
Yes. That being said, I think Persephone talking to Dionysus right after the kitten murder happened, like, saved it a little bit for me in that regard. But honestly, I so dig it. I think this is, for me, one of the best adaptations of Greek mythology I've seen to date, because it's taking on the monumental task of depicting those supernatural beings that are the Greek gods. And I feel like for once it succeeds, that they do feel larger than life, but also not, they're understandable, they're relatable in some ways. And you can kind of get of like, yeah, you shouldn't want to worship these people because they're awful. But you also, it's probably similar to watching Succession, which I have not watched, but I imagine it feels like that. It's like, are these real people? Are these real problems? But they are.
Yeah.
There is I wanted to actually just mention about the world and like the setting, because like the setting is, I think, key. It's very, as I was thinking just now, it's like Romeo plus Juliet sort of esque. It's like Verona and neon lights. Like it's a kind of, I mean, it's modern, but there's also lots of technology, for example, is really all over the place. People are using like rotary phones and
payphones. Yeah. Like Dionysus just walking by payphones being like, nope.
Yeah. And so it's in this like sort of modern setting. It does have like the feel of like an adapted Shakespeare, where it's like it's Crete, but it's Las Vegas, but also Italy, or I think they filmed in Spain. Oh my God, there was that one freaking scene where they're in this for Minos' palace. That set is like a place in Spain where if in the Star Wars prequels, there's a scene on Naboo where Padme and Anakin are walking through like a colonnaded hall. And I'm like, that's the Padme, like, because people go to that palace. It's a palace in Madrid, I think.
Nerd.
And they go there and like walk the hallway, and it's like this thing in Star Wars. So I was like, anyways.
Can I, before we jump off the Romeo plus Juliet thing, I want to mention, because the woman who plays Eurydice, Aurora Perrineau, she was tweeting out a thing about how apparently the mood board, when they were thinking about the aesthetics for this series, Baz Luhrmann's Romeo and Juliet was like one of the things that they were. So like the fact that you're getting that vibe is in fact they were aiming for that vibe, which is amazing because her dad was in Romeo and Juliet. Like, she is the daughter of Harold Perrineau, who was Mercutio in that production. And so like this,
my God.
And apparently like this came to light like mid filming. Like no one connected all these dots until like they were talking about like, the inspiration for the aesthetics and stuff. And she was like, yeah, that's my dad. It's just such a wild, like, just kind of like a wild intertext going on there on a couple different levels. So before we moved off of like the Baz Luhrmann aesthetics of it all, I just wanted to be like, actually, there's even more fun facts about that.
I love that so much.
I mean, and there's like, I wanted to talk about the setting too of being in Heraklion, because it makes sense from a myth point. Like a lot of the focus is, this is where King Minos reigns from. It's where Palace of Knossos is close by. But it also, like, I knew it wasn't Heraklion. I've been there. And I'm like, yeah, those are Mediterranean buildings, but that's not quite right. Like, I couldn't place it for the longest time. Then I looked it up. I'm like, okay, it is Spain. It's not quite right. But it's also the population there is Brits, right? Like, this is like the British Empire on a different island. But it also makes sense because it's a huge vacation spot. Rethymno more is like the British vacation spot on the island of Crete. So it's touching on all of these different kind of histories in creating this setting that has a name that's familiar, but it's not quite right either.
Yeah, and it's kind of everywhere and nowhere. Like it's got LA vibes, it's got Vegas vibes. Like they go out to the desert and you feel like you're on some highway bar in the middle of like California or Nevada or something like that. And so it's the accents are all British and Australian and American and I think sort of the idea like the world or the Greek world is this sort of pan Anglophone thing, I guess, for lack of a better word.
Well, and I feel like a lot of things that treat myth sometimes, go for that kind of like myth time. Like when is it? Kind of now-ish, but like not a little different from now. Yeah. Like it's kind of set in our world, but like just a skosh different. And that I think that that's a thing that a lot of adaptations do, and I think that's effective in terms of thinking about what. It wants to be relatable, right? We want to think of it as contemporary. It's not like set off in like far distant times where everyone says the now, but it's also not, it's not right here, right? So like the rules of right here and right now don't have to apply, but
like, does anyone have a smartphone?
I don't think so.
Yeah, like they have like pagers, it feels like, or something. Like they're all on like wired like rotary phones to Amy's point, I much prefer this to what we usually get, which is the like smushed together ancient Greece that's kind of all popular perceptions of ancient times, sort of all just kind of squeezed into one fine paste. And so that it has like the Baz Luhrmann-y, that kind of maximalism of like the colors, the vibrancy, the noise, all that kind of stuff.
Well, and I mean, we have something fairly recent to compare it to with the Percy Jackson series, right? Of like trying to set, all right, let's plop the Greek gods in modern times. But it felt so disconnected because like, oh, well, we use Iris Messenger and things like that. Like the gods are using completely different technologies as opposed to now you're like the use of anachronistic technologies, which is also very present in myth. Like the Iliad and the Odyssey, which is kind of cool.
Sure.
But the gods are still like using it too. And so there's a stronger connection to humans, even though like they're mostly spending all their, Zeus is spending most of his time up in Olympus. And that's kind of a
slash Tivoli.
Right. Yeah.
Slash Italy.
Yeah. And then, but Dionysus is one of the ones who's like, no, let's go hang out and party with the people because they're fun. And the one time Zeus goes down, it's like, they look a little too jovial for my Oh, yeah. So it's kind of cool. And I think that's what makes this successful of a Greek retelling is that they didn't try to set it in weird ancient time, but they kind of took those ideas and be like, well, let's set it in weird, like everyone who watches this is going to connect and realize it's like, okay, this is the modern world, but it's not quite right. It's not quite the modern world. And so we've done it with our modern times, which I think is kind of cool, actually.
And I hate to go full like, well, let me talk about tragedy because I like to make everything about tragedy. I was a tragedian or a tragedy scholar, I guess not a tragedian per se, but like that is so much what like tragedies would have been, right? Like they're set in mythic time, which is like some kind of past world, but like they're talking about contemporary Athens or Thebes or whatever. And like that it's both of those.
It's Thebes, but it's really Athens or whatever. It's Corinth, but it's really, the sort of legal assumptions are Athenian or whatever it is that's underpinning it.
I mean, the Trojan War is often used a lot by the playwrights as like a stand-in to make commentary on the Peloponnesian War, right? Like, look what they were doing wrong. They were so stupid back then. They were so stupid. And everyone's like, yeah, they were. It's like, make the connection. Make the connection.
Well, and even the, like, how, like for things that were performed in Athens, they're pride themselves a lot on, like, how great their democracy is. But, like, tragedies are always operating under a monarchy of some sort. And they don't like monarchies. But we can use, like, a monarchy, autocratic kind of rule to still talk about democratic issues. And I think that also kind of works in terms of like, there's a president, but he doesn't seem to have anyone else he's accountable to. Like Minos seems to be, or like, I guess king, but like, it seems as though he's
king. They kind of allude to, somebody makes a reference to Athenians having elections. And then Minos says, like, we don't do that here. We need a king. He kind of like, I think in like one of the limousine rides, he explains like why king.
Yeah. And like, she inherits his rule after him. So, but like, I think you can still, even though like, it's a king and like, we don't have a king, you can still really think about the issues in play. Like that also works, where I'm like, oh, this has interesting political resonances with now, even though, like, you know, we don't have a king, and England kind of does, but not really. So, you know.
Right. Yeah.
I feel like, I don't know how many people still feel like they're still the Queen of England. It's like, God bless the Queen. It's like, we don't need to go any further than that.
Like the cat, I got bad news for you vis-a-vis that queen.
I saw the cue, okay?
I don't know if anyone's told
like
you
the
yet.
interesting connections between religion and politics, because I think Minos was so wrapped up in the religion of it all, right? And he's like, you know, the gods decide who rules. And even at the very end, when Ari's mom was like, you know, you've been given the rule or whatever, and she's like, yeah, I don't know about that. We're not going to rule in this way. So I think that is also something that really speaks to like how we think about politics today and where religion fits into it.
I mean, religion is going to hit different. Like there is something very tactful where like the gods are like very, very clearly real and manifest in a way, where like this religion is in some ways kind of not like a religion, because there is like very hard definitive proof. Like you can go meet Dionysus at a bar. You probably won't, but you might.
Yeah,
but you could.
Like, you could, but like, do normal people see the gods all the time?
Yeah, but then like, I guess like maybe the analogy, it's like, are they like, they're more like billionaires or something like that.
That's
like,
kind
that's
of,
the analogy.
that's why I made the succession thing, because, and the way they're framing it is not that they've always been supernatural beings. What they're framing it as is like, at some point a long time ago, Zeus, in killing his father, figured out how to extract his soul, which basically it did give him power. And like, that's kind of the interesting thing too, is like, we don't get to see the power really happen, with a few exceptions of Hera and the weird baby scene and the bee. That was a bit much. And then Zeus, like, I loved his orchestrating of a thunderstorm. I thought that was adorable, actually. It was really cute.
Cute Jeff Goldblum hand motions.
Yeah. But for the most part, it doesn't, you know, and we get the news stories in the background of like, oh, all of these natural disasters are happening. But it's on the news, and it's not, and it's just like Jeff Goldblum, Zeus enjoying it. It's like, yeah, pray to me. And it's not, it doesn't feel like so connected to like what he's doing. So it was kind of interesting. It's like, yeah, this is basically playing off like an old mafia family that's falling apart almost.
Yeah, the tracksuits is not incidental. That he would wear like tracksuits and gold chains, that he's dressed like some kind of, you know, midlife crisis mafiosa type or wannabe mafiosa. You know, Tony Soprano-y.
Yeah.
Which I think not, you know, a lot of this is just like, well, when I teach Greek myth classes, here's things but like I think in a lot of ways, the relationship between like gods to heroes is a way of kind of thinking about the relationship of like kings and the elites and the wealthy to the normal people, right? And that kind of relationship mirrors like, okay, the gods are super powerful and they can do all kinds of different things. Should they, you know, and that like, it, in some ways that like super powerful beings that are like people, but more powerful, like that is kind of an analogy to billionaires or, you know, ruling class or whatever. And so I think like that the idea of showing them as, you know, they've got this like big, luxurious, sprawling estates and this and that. They have all of these like ball boys, like no one seems to ever play tennis, but they have ball boys as though there's a lot of tennis going on. And like, I think the aesthetic is all very like super rich, which I do think maps onto a lot of ways of like, okay, so like, you know, if at the end when Ari is like, you know, the gods, we're not doing this anymore, that it is in some ways, part of me does wish, like Elijah, like you said, that a one season arc would have been nice in some ways, but I do think it also sets up for a really interesting, if we think about what the implications of like challenging the gods, overthrowing the gods, bringing the gods down, like that is kind of a revolutionary gesture. And like thinking about what that means as a completely separate storyline. Like we've set this up, like now we ride, like now we're doing whatever we're doing. And I think that is kind of an interesting, because like I think too about Hadestown, and like that has a very anti-capitalist message baked into a mythological story. And I think that in some ways that kind of gods to heroes, elites, more powerful people really works nicely as a way to talk about wealth and power in the contemporary world. And so like I am intrigued to see. I hope they get a second season because otherwise it's going to be crazy unsatisfying to see how things left, right? Where they just have a cliffhanger for season 2. But it does. I think that is a different story than the ones that they were exploring this season. And so I think like if you want to tell 2 different stories, 2 seasons is a good way to do. We have one plot line. We're finding out that the gods are shams and fates and what's happening and all of this stuff. And then like season 2 is like, okay, now we've learned. Now what are we going to do about it?
This fits really nicely into like the modern sort of subgenre of like anti-billionaire media, of your Successions and your Glass Onions and your Triangles of Sadness, and just like a larger trend we see media of just like kind of exposing billionaires or painting them as these like buffoons and idiots with way too many resources at their disposal. And that they need to go down and that they're actually bad for society generally. But Christy, sorry, you were going to say.
Yeah, I wanted to talk a little bit about season 2 because initially we had heard from someone, a friend, that KAOS had really difficult production and it languished to get produced for a long time. And when it finally came out, we're just kind of like, I don't know, when you hear that, it doesn't bode well. And Netflix, even though like it was still in the top 10 shows on Netflix when I started watching it after, it'd been out for a couple weeks at least, it still doesn't have a season 2 announced. And I'm wondering if along with kind of the anti-billionaire message into it, it feels like a pretty successful queer telling of myths as well.
Yes.
And I think very intentionally introduced that. And Greek myth lends itself to it really well. And I'm wondering
to have Eddie Izzard be one of the fates.
I know, it blew my mind. I'm like, that's Eddie Izzard.
I assume the other fates are also very big queer icons, and I'm just not cool enough to recognize them. But the way they were shot made it seem like they were celebrities.
Yeah, Shay and Sam Buttery.
I think Eddie Izzard is using a different name these days.
Susie.
I just want to be
Susie, my bad.
Susie. Yeah, it's listed as Susie Eddie Izzard. So I think because like it was such a stage name for such a long time too. But Susie Eddie Izzard is the official
predominantly using she/her pronouns now. I think just so. But I think it's a very. I mean, we haven't even gotten into talking about KAOS, but like KAOS is a trans actor playing a trans character, which is one of those things like you don't always see, and often you have like a trans woman is played by a man a lot in ways that like really is pretty harmful representation of like perpetuates all kinds of ideas about whether trans women are really women, and there's all of this rhetoric, and like it's such a small thing, but to cast a trans male actor as a trans man is like kind awesome. Of, it's a small but like big thing. So, and having all of the fates are like very queer. I just like loved how much they leaned into that. Like this is one of the people in the chair of my department here. Like at one point we discussed classics departments can really like kind of veer in 2 directions. Like you can be like the big gay, like queer kind of classics, or like the white supremacist kind of classics. And we were talking about how like we want to make it clear, like which kind are we? Like let's put that right on the label of our department, that we are like the big gay kind of classics and not the white supremacist kind of classics. And like I feel like this leaned so so joyfully into the queer classics side, which I love, because so many times people like shows want to shy away from that, and this didn't even a little bit try to shy away from that.
Yeah. So Netflix, if you are holding off on declaring season 2 because of that, well, F you and get it done.
Well, and I'm a little bit worried because Netflix is really good at canceling great shows that should be canceled.
The method is never clear. And also, well, one, like the whole way it measures any metrics and like what thresholds shows need to pass or not pass is always obscure in this strange dark art. And like it's on, and there's this like weird trap. I think we've talked about it on the show of like, it creates this loop where like people don't want to watch a show because they're like, it's only going to be one season. So like, I'm not going to get invested if it's just going to get canceled anyways, which then increases the likelihood of a cancellation. And then, there seem to be like, many of little faith happening over in Netflix, and things are getting canceled left and right. But
yeah. Well, and the other problem that we talk about with Netflix is the binging aspect, right? So like it has all this hype for the initial release, maybe a couple weeks, but then like it doesn't have the time. Like if we had watched this, over an 8-week span with one episode coming out, think of how much buildup there would have been. Like where are we going with the storylines? Where are we going with the prophecies? And and then word of mouth spreads, and that invests a lot more people in watching it. And it's so frustrating because it's like they do have to make this huge cliffhanger at the end of the season in hopes that it's going to like get enough behind it for another season, which is frustrating from a storytelling point in some ways. So I did just want to highlight that, like, the rumors we had heard about the production taking so long and the fact that this declaration hasn't happened yet. It's like, why is that, Netflix? Give us a good reason, because this is fabulous as far as I'm concerned.
Again, but
exactly. Yeah, Owl House. They did, Nickelodeon did it to Korra. Yeah, but like a lot of people are doing it. It's like, oh, we're going to try and be a little bit more inclusive.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I don't know how I feel about that. We have some angry Karens out there, but like they're so beloved and it makes people feel seen. I've heard of some of the other stories that have been adopted by the trans community from Greek mythology. KAOS was a new one to me. So like the minute I saw that name, I'm like, gonna look at that myth because I feel like it's gonna be cool. And sure enough, it was pretty cool. So
yeah. Well, it's one that I'm surprised. Well, maybe I shouldn't say surprised, but that I think could get so much more traction because it is such a touchstone for, I think, a lot of people. And it deals with a lot of trauma, but is also really, really gratifying in the end in so many ways.
It's a happier story because like when I want to talk about, mythological, like, liminal gender, non-binary gender transformations, Tiresias is sort of, it just hits some snakes for whatever reason, changes to a woman, changes back. And that one is, complicated, but not like there's not a lot of value judgment to the transformation. But then you get somewhere like with the story of Iphis or like with hermaphroditus. It's framed as a punishment to have an intersex body. It's like the water like poisoned his masculinity and made him less of a man. And like Iphis is a story of like transformation, not because this is what like they want and then they feel is a better fit for who they are. It's because they can't imagine a happily ever after with two women. Like that's not ultimately a triumphant, exciting story. Whereas this one like kind of is like it's a it is. KAOS goes on to have kind of a badass life as a soldier. Like he's invincible, and like for anyone who hasn't like done a deep dive on the myth, like he can't really be killed. Like to defeat him, like they have to like kind of bang him into the ground, like nail him like a peg in one of those like things for kids, because like he's basically he can't be killed. And like there's a handful of these. There's another. It's who is it in? Maybe Diodorus Siculus. But there's this other story that I ran across just. Maybe Plutarch. Anyway, it's like depicted as like a real life story. I talked to several doctors who were there, and it's this figure who like male genitalia just sort of like explode like out of a cyst kind of. And then just this figure is just like, well, it's a court case, which is an extra like weird. And like, well, I'm a dude. So you actually like the very weird conclusion of this scene or the story is like the court says that this figure has to sleep with their husband and eventually, and they're like, legally, like you got to, and the husband is like, I got back from war and like they won't sleep with me anymore. And so the court's like, yeah, you got to. And then there's this triumphant moment of like unveiling and like taking clothes off and being like, actually, I have a penis. I'm a man. And they're like, oh my God, you are so right. We can't tell a man what to do with his body. Very accurate. And then like dude just goes off and lives his life. Like it's a, one of these stories that's like, actually this was a better fit and it works and it's good. And it's like this very like affirmative story, but like, you know, I think that a lot of times we get hung up on like, is Elagabalus a trans emperor? And like,
Right.
and
yeah.
I think a lot of times it feels like that's the only figure that, you know, like if we want to think about like trans representation, we got to talk about Elagabalus. And like Elagabalus, there's a lot of complicated ethical questions around how we view gender and bodies and smear tactics and xenophobia and stuff. But like KAOS, there isn't really. Like this
Yeah.
is this is just a dope ass mythological story about a trans man who is a super badass. Like it is weird to me that there hasn't been more of a pickup of this particular, like it's not in any of the, you know, mythological retellings are so popular and that's just not there. And I love that KAOS has this as like he grew up with the Amazons and this like very because like Amazons are such a locus. I'm gonna plug a recent article I wrote about that Amazon, like lesbians and Amazons, and the lesbian nation is Amazon culture, I think is the title of it. I should know, but it's like how much Amazons, the reception of Amazons has been really tied up in like queerness and gender norms and bodies and all of this kind of stuff in the recent like 70s in the US. And I love that that's a community that is really thinking about gender and that you get kind of both a rejection of his transition and like an absolute affirmation in his mom. And like I think that in some ways is like a really apt analogy for like for TERFs, for trans exclusive radical feminists, and for very like inclusive. Like, you know, there are a lot of lesbians who are like, hell yeah, trans people are great. We need to affirm and include these, and like that's part of our movement. And then you have a lot of these kind of TERFs who are dying on the hill of nope, I can only accept a certain amount of gender nonconformity, and there's apparently a hill that's just too far to go on that. And like I thought that really worked nicely as almost like a reflection of historical trends around trans inclusive feminism.
Definitely.
Yeah, I very much liked that juxtaposition of KAOS set in this community and thinking about like how even coming out to like people who you know support and love and care about you, it can still be fraught because you still have to contend with your community at the same time. And so I really liked that's why this felt like a really successful queer retelling of Greek myth in certain ways. Also, Theseus hooking up with the Cyanex. I'm like, all right.
That was on the thing. I was like,
I know.
Things I would never guess to happen in a retelling. That would have been really low on my list.
I like wasn't expecting it, but like I love. And like it also just takes Theseus out of the Minotaur story in a way that like I thought was really interesting. Like it highlights the siblingness. Like one of the things I love about Catullus' retelling of Theseus and Ariadne in 64. Yeah, 64. Yep. Where it highlights not that like the Minotaur is a monster, but Minotaur is half brother, like the brotherliness of that relationship. And I kind of love that it like we got to really see that relationship as opposed to like Theseus killing the monster, saving the people, like whatever they would want you could do with a Theseus retelling. Like I love that they went in like a very different direction, and but like you got to bring in like misunderstood prophecies and oracles in like a very cool way with that as well. And so like I don't know, I thought that was really an interesting decision. And just what we're talking about, like casual queer relationships that like they didn't make a big deal about, but just were like, hey, also here's this Prometheus and Chiron, like just like just there, like in a, you know, it doesn't need to be like a very special episode about like queer, you know, that we're making. It's just like, yeah, you know, there's all kinds of different relationships, and we don't need to like obsess about this. Just we got Karen, and you know, sure, maybe that one ends in murder, but murder for a greater cause, maybe
for a greater good. Yeah, yeah. To be fair, Prometheus isn't doing great after that, but for different reasons. So another thing that I was noticing, and I think this ties in really well with tragedy too, is how violence is being used in the show, because it's really interesting like what you do see, but like a lot of the violence being committed by the gods happens off camera. And I thought that's very similar to violence in ancient Greek plays often happen off stage, and you only get to see the aftermath or a description of like what happened. So like when Hera's sitting on the stairs with her Tacita with and her eyes have been pulled out. So like we know Zeus did something terrible to her and we see kind of the result, but but you didn't actually have to see the violence of the action to understand that, which is a nice departure from some of the other TV series we've had to watch that feel like they can go ham because of streaming gives them a lot more leeway in how violent they can be in the depiction. Even poor Dennis, you didn't see it happen. You just saw the knife go down, and I hate Zeus so much.
Well, I think I'm still surprised at like how much violence there was. I think at one point I was like, what is this rated? Like there's like the guy where we first meet the Furies and he like goes into the bathroom to shoot himself. Like that was pretty
I think it was specifically and the violence done by the gods was always off camera because you see Ari kill her father. You see her stab him.
And you see the people in the like the fighting pit, the Amazon and the what's his face, like they like slit his throat on camera. And I feel like there's a lot of violence against like people when they're like arresting Trojans. That's like pretty violent.
So they don't really show they don't show once Minos changes his mind about pardoning the Trojans. They don't show that massacre. They just show the after effects of it. And so I wonder. I hadn't noticed that because there are places that it's like very violent, but there are a lot of places where, like you said, it's the use of the violence is for us to see how the characters are going to deal with it, which is like a very Greek tragedy kind of thing of like, we don't need to have the gore. It's all of this suffering is really about how people react to it, how they deal with it, how they, what decisions they make in the face of suffering, not like gratuitous suffering. And, there was some gratuitous suffering. There was some real gory, violent stuff.
Like the ball boys. I just go back to the ball boys every time.
To be a ball boy in Olympus.
I know. But I feel like it was used really well, the use of violence. And I feel like it was that shock factor didn't really go away because I was still really surprised at it when it did happen going through, because I think they did really judiciously pick like what is impactful, what does the reader audience need to see, and what is doesn't, what we don't need to, because it was who was it? Hecuba and Andromache's like reaction to
what happened,
the death of the Trojans. That was like the important part.
Yeah, and I think it's sensitive to the effects of, like Christy kind of said, like one, like trying to move away from like the gratuitous violence of the prior decades worth of television, and also sensitive to the effect where like we're getting a lot of analogies to real life issues, like Amy was just talking about TERFs and trans exclusive and trans inclusive feminists, but then also the Trojans are very much kind of this analogy for police brutality, especially against minority communities, and being really conscious about like not showing that, right? Not showing the effects of police violence on refugees or minorities.
I think the refugee is a big component of it too, because that's what Brexit was about in a lot of ways, the same as all of the border stuff that gets talked about here in the US is like.
And so, it is the violence and the effects of violence. It's different when it's ball boys being turned into clay shots versus, this kind of political.
Why do I find it funny every time?
Well, there's because
I think it's the
like it's framed, right? And I feel like just now that you pointed out the showing and not showing of violence, like it feels like kind of the framing of the violence is focalized through like the character, right? Like Zeus doesn't care about the violence against the ball boys. So we don't, it's not framed as tragedy. Right. It's because we're getting this kind of through the eyes of Zeus, and the gods like don't really care. Whereas like, I mean, Dionysus and Persephone do care. Like when we see like when our poor kitty gets murdered, we see the people who don't care at all. And we see the people who like do care. And I think that treatment of violence as like, who does violence mean something for, and who does violence mean nothing to? And like, violence is, and Zeus, Zeus even talks about like, that's why he kills Dennis, is because like you shouldn't love things that are lesser than us.
Yeah.
And like that juxtaposed with like Dionysus falling in love with Ariadne, Dionysus like,
I loved that moment,
which was
so much.
such a nice little, like, there were so many delightful little Easter eggs. Like, I mean, even just like walking through when you're in like on Crete and like you're seeing all of the different like names of things. I was like, there were so many delightful little Easter eggs. And like, yeah, a moment that's kind of just a throwaway, like sees her, is it when she kills her dad? I don't even remember what it was.
No, it's when she goes, "F the gods," and Dionysus literally says, "I think I'm in love." And it was, that moment was so good because Andy had walked in and it's like, that was such a great reference. He's like, I mean, it's obvious, right? It's the Minotaur. And I'm like, go away. You don't even know.
Leave.
But yeah, like ooh, this could be really setting up interestingly, like when, Dionysus and Ariadne end up together or not. Like, I think how based in but not married to any particular telling this was is like real, because there's an impulse to be like, well, that's not how the story usually goes, but like Greek myth never cares about how the story usually goes. There are elements that have to be there, but also like there's so much flexibility within those core pillars of what these stories are about.
Yeah, and I feel like that's the Orpheus and
that's what I was about to say. That was so good.
Yeah.
I loved the treatment of like, that's just a take we never really hear Eurydice.
Look at me.
Yeah. And the idea of like, this isn't love, right? And like, I don't want this. Like, it's always, like you said, like this, like, white knight going to save the princess and right off into the sunset of being alive again. And like, she doesn't want that. And our stories often don't care about what, like, I can't remember a version that really like gives us a lot of internal Eurydice feelings. And that's I just thought that was such a compelling and interesting and like creative, different take on the Orpheus and Eurydice story, which is always cast as a love story and a happily ever after love story, not an unrequited tragic love story.
Just like the selfish nature of Orpheus's love, that it is so kind of inwardly directed, or it's all about him expressing his feelings and getting his satisfaction or not, and things like that.
Yeah. Well, and I liked how it ended with like, he knows that this is ending, right? And Eurydice demands that, look at me. And it's like, and it's not her leaving to go back to the underworld. It's just her leaving him, which is basically what the myth was anyway. And I'm like, bravo.
I know. I agree. I thought that was awesome. Yeah. Also, I just have to say, Killian Scott, who plays Orpheus, I thought was perfect. And I just know him from the Dublin Murders, where he was Rob Riley, and everybody should read ton of French novels.
I got really hung up on the sort of aesthetic decision that Orpheus is Coldplay, basically.
It was very Coldplay, yeah.
Okay, fine.
And I could like when the concert in the first episode, I'm like, this is just a Coldplay concert, and that was a hurdle for me that I couldn't surmount.
Yeah. I thought it was more like a Christian rock concert. Like they had like the big meander in the background instead of a cross.
This world where like all of your pop music is like kind of about the gods indirectly or about myths. Like, does that just mean all pop music is just Christian rock now?
That's the vibe I was getting.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about, because I got very much the Coldplay vibe, but I hadn't thought about how much that is very like Jars of Clay, Newsboys kind of like.
Yes.
Well, and there's something else about the music too. I had the subtitles up again, and they were being very poignant about every time a soundtrack song came on, like the title and everything. And I thought that was, Colin, go ahead. Go ahead.
This was actually this is one of the things I can point to, that the needle drops bugged me, and that they felt they were too many, too heavy-handed. And like a big hang up for me is when a show or a movie has like a very obvious needle drop or very on the nose, or just songs that are like, this is a very popular song and it's there are some that I like in Guardians of the Galaxy. One of the things that those movies did was like a lot of the needle drops are songs that may not have been familiar or are things that songs you hadn't heard in many, many, many years. This is less true with the more recent ones, but the first ones especially, like these are hits that slipped under the radar. Yeah. Whereas like a bad example that I hate is in the first Suicide Squad movie, where it is like every classic rock top 10 playlist. And this show was somewhere in the middle where like maybe it was because it was kind of targeted at like older millennial or younger Gen X or something like that. But these are pop songs I've been hearing a lot for my entire life. And I just kind of wanted to like, again, with the Baz Luhrmann of just like take your foot off the gas pedal, just like 10% on this one.
I am with Colin on that, and that I think they were a bit heavy handed. I also thought the intention was again to mimic, ancient Greek plays of like, this is supposed to be acting as the chorus in some ways. It's meant to inform our understanding of what's happening. But I agree with Colin. It felt heavy handed in some respects because it was just kind of back to back to back a lot of the times.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that you guys are so much more sophisticated viewers of things than I am. Like, I am such an easy mark for a show. I'm like, I will suspend my disbelief and I'm just in it and like, cool, I like this song. This is a cool song that I remember and I like. Like, I am, when I, like, it didn't bother. I was like, oh, like when the David Bowie song came on and I was like, oh, this is a cool song. I was like, oh, is this going to be like the Nirvana or the David Bowie? And like, that doesn't snap me out of things in a way that I think is just because I'm not as thoughtful or sophisticated a viewer of things as you guys are.
I will say for me, it's because I do have the subtitles on. So like, not only are they giving you like the song title and then it's doing the lyrics. So when you're used to reading on the screen, all the dialogue, and then all of a sudden that's being interspersed with song lyrics, then you're a bit more cognizant of like, is this happening in a quiet moment that's meant to be impactful and inform the scene? Or is it disrupting kind of the flow of what's happening between the characters, sort of a thing? And that becomes more apparent when you have to read it as opposed to just kind of environmentally enjoying it.
Well, I have the subtitles on all the time as well. Somehow I started wearing, I can't take them off now. Like I'm dependent on, I think it was like something with very heavy accents, like Irish or something accents that we were like, let's go, and then just never looked back. But I think I am more aware of this song and like the lyrics, that sometimes like the vibe of the song fits a scene, but the lyrics can be either like weird or like too on the nose, but if it's quiet in the background, like you wouldn't notice that unless you had the subtitles on. So yeah, but that being said, like I have the subtitles on and I still was just like, this is great. I love this. Sounds are fun. So is music. So again, just take the compliment. You guys are better viewers of things than I am.
No, edit that out.
Leave it in.
But like, part of it is maybe I'm just being like kind of a hipster douche about it, where like I kind of want the song to like expose me to a song, where like BoJack Horseman was a show where it has a lot of great music in it, and usually in the end credits or something like that. But it is kind of exposing, where I'm looking at the track list for the first episode, and you've got Dire Straits, ABBA, Blue Oyster Cult, Paul Simon, and that's like half of them, right? Part of it is I think it was a trick done a little bit one too many times, where there were like 3 to 8 needle drops per episode, and then again when you're watching it all in one continuous sitting, it becomes apparent, but.
Yeah, I wonder how much the binging like highlighted that for you, because once you notice it and you can't unnotice it and you aren't stopping.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I was gonna say, anytime that Paul Simon is on a track list, I'm like, yep, this is great. I'm happy. Hello.
Yeah, love a good Paul Simon solo, Simon and Garfunkel. I've never complained about any of those showing up. All of it.
I'll plug the Bear too. The Bear's good about this. The Bear has good needle drops.
Mm-hmm. Bear is really good about this. I would agree.
Yes. Also, Megamind. I'm just throwing it out there.
Look, if we're just throwing stuff out there, I really like Scrubs' use of music and introducing you to songs I didn't know in Scrubs as well.
It's all men at work. Isn't that with Scrubs? It's always men at work.
Sometimes it's Colin Hayes solo stuff.
Here we go.
I have a big question that we should get before Amy leaves.
Yes.
Most of the things I've made. I have a very short list this time around of like just my like questions, multipliers. But the top one that we haven't talked about, which is why the K in KAOS.
Oh.
Okay.
I actually have an unrelated thought about chaos that might eventually get us towards like why the K, which I did not.
Or even just why chaos. Let's start there. Right?
Yeah. So, well, I guess like I think to my mind, it's to mark it out as different from when we think of like chaos as like, oh, chaos, because like the Greek word, like to be all pedantic about like chaos, the Greek word, which like we usually, I mean, rightfully transliterate as like that CH, right? It's an aspirated K, but it's more, I mean, it's what I think they were talking about with like the nothing, right? When like that place
Void,
where all
right.
like the souls and stuff where like, you know, Hades is going back into the nothing. Like that was kind of what I was thinking of as being like, oh, that's why they're calling it chaos, because it's about like where the souls go and where the bodies go and things. Because yeah, like chaos is a primordial force in Hesiod is void, right? It's the void before the creation of things. And I felt like the K marks it out a little bit as like you're still kind of going to read it as chaos, but it also it's different, right? It makes it a little bit more like foreign or exotic or whatever, where it makes you think about like maybe it's not chaos in the way we use the word chaos. Because yeah, when they were talking about like the nothing place where all the bodies go that they discover like that, though I don't know for sure, because at the end when they're like chaos reigns and I'm like, oh, I don't know what that means. If the nothing is chaos, then I don't know what it means for chaos to reign. Is it so I don't know. I don't know for sure about any of that, but those were my general weird thoughts about chaos.
Can I want to tack on that thought of like the chaos being not true chaos, like the primordial chaos, because I mean, one of the big things supposedly that Zeus is trying to get around his prophecy, and Zeus is always trying to get around prophecies, and he's always trying to outdo fates, right? And so he torches them, and we all know that that didn't succeed though, and he ends up fulfilling his prophecy. And so if fate is still working, if they're still, because you can't destroy it, then you can't really go back to a point where it was only chaos, right? Everything's still in existence. So you can't truly go back to that original point before anything truly existed. So maybe that's what it is. It's like, this is pseudo chaos. This is chaos as humans imagine it, and not like the true beginning and creation of things. Like it's not a clean slate, really, right?
Right. Yeah.
It just feels like our world is falling apart, but it's not really a clean slate.
I really like that.
No, I was just going to say, like, I wonder if it's just like I feel like something close to that, like clean slate, is the creep of like some kind of oblivion, some kind of nothingness, like coming and taking over, right? Like I don't know, like a black hole or something. But like that's the opposite of what happens. Like that's not what is, you know, it's people who used to, like the souls used to go into nothingness. They used to go into oblivion or turn into meander water or whatever. But like now they're back. And so like it's kind of the opposite of an idea of like oblivion coming. Like if oblivion is taking over, some big like, you know, nothingness coming, like it's not that. It's very much kind of the opposite of that.
Yeah, no, I think this is exactly where my brain was going, is like the whole promise of renewal or like living again is a lie, right? Like that's not what happens to you when you die. And like Orpheus and Eurydice kind of figure this out, and when they come back out of the underworld, they're like, you can just begin again. Like you don't have to erase it to start again. Like you can just choose to do the different things. So yeah, I think saying that like there is no blank slate and that we all have to deal with our shit is really poignant and makes a lot of sense. And the chaos is maybe us realizing that there is no renewal, there's no blank slate. We have to deal with our shit.
Yeah. Part of it, like, I guess, like, I think I need to clarify the rules of the universe, because they seem to imply that renewal, like, is a thing, and like souls normally get renewed, a la like Plato's where, you know, you go down and then you get allotted a new life and whatever you were in this life.
Right? Like that's why Dionysus and Orpheus are predominant in this story in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and it's, and like you get like the pious woman we meet who's like, I'm going to get something good, and then Eurydice like, I'm probably going to be like a dog or a rock or something like that because I defied God.
Yeah. I'd be a dog. I'd be happy with that.
The show, as I understood it, was saying that like Zeus and company like hijacked the system to like funnel off souls like a resource where it should be renewing, but it's not. They're siphoning it into this pool for them to draw from. And capitalism being a non-sustainable kind of, you can't have constant growth. And that like eventually like the walls of this reservoir, such as it is, are going to burst. And then there's going to be some kind of cataclysmic like nothingness that takes over. That was my read on the situation.
Yeah.
Yes. I forget where I was going with this larger point about chaos and like what chaos is. Cause like the K-ness. So I had a couple of thoughts. One was the ungenerous reading, which is, it's
easier
kind of
to
like,
read.
well, no, just giving it the kind of like the exotic sort of flair, or like the worst version of this is when like people use like sigmas to write e's or whatever, like just to give it like a Greeky look.
Yep.
Even though, right, as we just talked about, chaos isn't really spelled with a K anyways, but that's neither here nor there. The other thought, because like it's written that way in the prophecies in the show, like people all get the same prophecy, and it says like chaos reigns. And it's chaos with a K, which implies, is it like a proper name? Like, is there a person or a personification that's going to show up? And they allude to Zeus's father. They never name him. Is it going to have something to do with that? Is somebody coming back? The cliffhanger kind of seems to imply that like someone or something's coming back.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Maybe that's what's going on. Maybe not. Is chaos a thing? Is a place?
Those are some good points. I was also, to tag on the one final thought of like, I also am questioning this concept of renewal, because again, this premise is like Zeus and the other Olympians are family, that Zeus killed his father by abstracting his soul and then just kept trying to figure out how to do it. And we see Hades go down into the underworld. He wants to undo some of the things that his family has done. So he attempts to like give a soul back, basically, is what it looks like, right?
Yeah.
And he can't do it.
Yeah.
And KAOS comes down and Hades says, how did you renewed her soul? How did you do that? And it's like, do we know that's actually what happened? Or is this the perception of what a mortal family originally thought was happening? That's why they marketed it to every other human, calling it renewal. And do we not truly understand what it is when you pass on? Even the gods don't really know, possibly.
Ooh, I would kind of love that.
I sort of read it as like that's just kind of KAOS' superpower, and like why they have to go through the frame, because once they go through the frame, they can take the system down.
And we still don't understand why, right? Like it's still not clear to me like why KAOS didn't pass out when Hades extracted the soul from Astyanax.
I guess so. I had a theory about his mom, right? Because it's his mom, and they had that like montage of this like connections between people. And it's like, it's about love, and it's about the love that we have for people in our lives. And it was like his love that like, I guess, renewed her because of this connection that she
still
had.
looks statuesque, so like a little more alive, but she's still kind of like,
yeah, I don't know. And this is why if they don't give us a second season, I'm going to be really upset, because I wanted a whole story. I wanted the whole story. I wanted answers.
I don't have any answers to that, but I have a thing that I really hope they get into in the future, like the idea of Riddy and Ari and like maybe Cassandra and Hecuba, and like rebuild Troy. Like we're going to rebuild Troy, which I kind of loved and like, especially as like I read a lot of the kind of transition from like this is how I read the end of the humanities all the time, of like it's a suppression of the more female chthonic deities, and like now our patriarchal sky gods are it's their time.
Law courts.
Like we're taking a very like masculine, overpowering and suppressing feminine things, and I like that. Like Zeus is very, very patriarchal, very like, raw, I'm ruling as a king and no one can cross me or whatever. And the idea that maybe what comes next for humans is something that's more of like a collaborative, and like, not that women are necessarily like, women can't be dictators, but that there are a bunch of these women who have been kind of like dicked over by kings and gods and all of this, and that they're going to form some kind of a community, even as Hera seems to be marshaling her troops to be Zeusy, right? Like she was out there being like, I'm going to take my Tacitus and I'm going to call whoever she called. Like,
oh, that's Ares. Gather the soldiers and make a bed for mommy.
No,
they're gonna do like a matristic society, right? Where it's like if Hera's matriarchal, right? Where she's just kind of reverse patriarchy. Like the matristic version would be a egalitarian, collaborative.
Yeah, I don't see Hera doing that really. Like I think the women leaders, like I think all of the human women have learned from their pain and their trauma, and I just don't see Hera as doing it. Like I think Hera's gonna like girl boss too close to the sun. Like I think she's gonna like she wants to be Zeus, and I don't think she's thinking about another way of being. Like I think it's gonna be a matriarchy, but still like oppressive and controlling and like ruling by fear and all of that.
Like matriarchy versus matristic, right? Where it's like,
right. And that was the kind of the last question I want to ask while we have time is like, what did we think about Zeus and Hera's relationship in this? Because I found it really interesting in that it was, I would say, was more of a codependent relationship in a lot of ways. Like she cares about Zeus and she wants.
She's like power, right?
She sets up she doesn't mind if she's second fiddle to Zeus, and she sets up all of these guardrails around him so he can be kind of at his best, right? She does everything to keep him as calm as possible. And maybe that is for her to like exert control and do things the way she wants to.
So she has that conversation with Poseidon, who I would say I would shout out Cliff Curtis. I think was my favorite performance in this.
Yeah,
he
beautiful,
was great.
Fantastic.
Where he says like you should have married me, and she's like, if I married you, I'd be doing this with Zeus. And I see a version of a future season where Hera actually ends up being the kind of real threat. And like, because Zeus is, I mean, one of the things about Zeus is he is kind of buffoonish and easily manipulated, through paranoia and sex and things like that. Anyways, that Hera is one in some ways is like more deadly because she's more deliberate and sort of strategic about power and how to get it and how to wield it and who should have it.
I was just going to say, like, I also like was really reflecting on her turning all of Zeus's lovers into bees because she just didn't want him to have any more children. And like Zeus, like at the time, like early on, is like, okay, he like, he keeps trying to go past the guardrail, but she like brings him back in. And then the comment of like at the end, we hear all the screams and like, what's that? It's like, I set the bees on fire. And he's like, they shouldn't be slaves to you anymore. And she's like, so you kill them instead? And like, I think that's kind of the interesting thing to think about is like, how are they using their power to address a particular problem? Hera's turning them into bees, which I think is interesting to think about. Like you have the queen bee and everyone who works in the hive very effectively.
I was reaching so hard for like a Beyonce allegory there. Like, it's got to mean something, right? Like there has to be, and I came up short. But
well, and I think that's the question is like, well, Zeus will just destroy everything if it just doesn't go his way. Hera wants to control it. Like he frames it as enslaving, right? And so I think that might be how we're going to see them exercise power differently. Sure. Hera's might look more appealing because there's order to it, right?
Well, and I think I really, because I was thinking about, especially at the end, but there were hints all throughout of like that she's really has a lot more power than it seems, right? And like even when Poseidon's like, let's get out of here, she's like, this is my house. Like I'm, Zeus can leave, you can leave. This is my house. And I think like I was thinking a lot about the stories where like Hera tries to overthrow Zeus, right? She tries to bring out monsters and tries to overthrow Zeus. And, they're all like little bits and pieces in our sources, but like where Thetis saves the day and it's the only thing that stands between like Hera and overthrowing Zeus. Because there is always this, right, in the back of Greek myth, this idea that like Zeus is just the current son who overthrew the father. And like we might have another one coming up at any time. And I was thinking a lot also about Prometheus Bound, where you have this sense of like Zeus is a young king of the gods. Like, he's new to it. And there's a real concern that, like, is he going to be good? Is this one gonna stick? Or like, maybe he doesn't know how to rule. Like, maybe he's not going to be any good at this. And like, I saw a lot of that kind of energy of like, he had to learn how to rule, and Prometheus was there and like had some thoughts about things, and it didn't, but it felt like there were a lot of little tantalizing hints at some of these stories. And so, yeah, I think like there's always that, like, what if the person who overthrows Zeus comes along? Athena's a near miss, Achilles is a near miss, like all of these people who had the potential to be the next generation. And like, in a lot of interpretations, the reason that Zeus doesn't get overthrown is that he manages to, in some ways, internalize some aspect of like feminine tricksiness, right? He can't be overthrown by his wife. He can't be overthrown by his mother, by his whatever, like all of these like Rhea and Gaia who are like orchestrating the overthrows doesn't work for him because he eats metis, and there's like a female tricksiness that he absorbs that, or however you want to read it. There's a lot of ways that you can kind of interpret these different stories as being like, he manages to come to some kind of truce between like a gender war. Or like maybe he learns the lessons of the previous guys and stops like being a monster to his kids or whatever. But like, what if he doesn't? What if he doesn't learn the lessons? What if he doesn't, like, he clearly hasn't learned whatever, like Hera's feminine ways of operating, of transforming, of power, of controlling secrets, of like all of her stuff seems to really be in tension with Zeus. And so like, I feel like on that read, he isn't going to be able to resist an overthrow because he doesn't have what it takes to not have the seeds of his own destruction like right in his rule. And so like, I don't know, I'm very intrigued by where they want to go with the Hera of it all in the next season. And like, I would love to see what they do with some of the other gods too.
Yeah, it seems like they're holding off and teasing more gods in the future. But to your point, Amy, it seems like a really key element to Zeus in this iteration is like male fragility, where he's kind of having a midlife crisis of sorts. There's the fact that he is aging, I guess.
The line. The line.
And really like all of Zeus's behavior is really like one could explain it as just like this is classic male fragility and insecurity and lashing out in the ways that, sleeping around, wanting to have more children, wanting to be young again, wanting to exert power through whether that's through violence or through natural disasters.
Before we completely wrap, I just wanted to very quickly mention, like, there were so many different, like, individual performances that I love. I just wanted to like briefly mention, like, I've got like the cast list up here. So I'm like looking at my, cause like, I thought a ton of them were like very well cast, very well acted. Dionysus, obviously, Naban, this one, an amazing diet. Like I loved his role. KAOS, Misha Butler, phenomenal. So I loved Medusa.
Debbie Meisner. I love her.
Just, my God. Yes. I loved, and like, they show us her hair for 1 second and it's amazing. Like, oh my God. I love that we got that clip, but like such, like the CGI they did on it was just so cool. And like, I loved her telling her snakes, like, when you wake me up in 5 minutes was just delightful. And like, I thought that having the guy from Harry Potter, Hades, as
I couldn't place him for the longest time.
David. Remus.
He's Remus. But like him and Persephone, and like I loved the scene where she's like, why? Like, I just want to know why you told that story. You got it in every single book. Like, that all of this happened, that I was kidnapped, that. And like, why? Like, I
why the pomegranate? I'm allergic.
Yeah, I'm allergic. I can't eat pomegranate. Like, I just loved all of that because it's such a, like, it works within the stories that we're always told about Persephone, but it also allows for it's such a constant tension of these stories that retell Persephone and Hades in a way that like is very like, oh, she wasn't raped. Actually, she fell in love. And like, there's just a lot of harmful stuff in that shift to the story of like, maybe every time that someone, like we're told that someone was raped, it's actually love and whatever. But like to have this sidestep that entirely and just be like, why did you make that the story? Like, I loved him. I love him. Like, I'm here. I'm not here against my will. Like, this is fine and good. And I'm not part of your dumb family. Like,
they made it look like
she eats her sandwich.
Well, they made it look like it's like, she's like a 10 and he's a 6, maybe. or something. And so Dionysus is like, wait, you do? And she's like, well, yeah. And he's like, oh, that's sweet.
That's cool.
I love love.
Is everybody else in love but me?
Like, who else is in love?
No, I mean,
no,
what?
I just heard about love and it sounds cool.
I mentioned Cliff Curtis already, but he to me, he stole the show from me, as well as Ramon Tikaram, Charon, who I just love the like blue collarness of him, like him on his fishing boat eating his crackers and just like,
Yes.
the punch in, punch out element to, I mean, yeah, like the underworld as a bureaucracy has been done, but.
And all gray. I loved that. It was all gray the whole time.
Yeah, so you get, I mean, especially because like it's super saturated on Olympus, and like you've got like the mortal world, and like, you know, there's color, but it's not that kind of like everything is so overdone in Olympus. And then like how, I don't know, I just really like, there were so many great performances, and whether or not we agree that the whole thing comes together perfectly at the end. Like there were just so many like great casting, great acting, great, like Ari was great. The whole thing about with like her and her brother and her mom, like having this unresolved grief, and like, this is even getting aside from like my deep love.
We haven't even touched on the wax statues either.
Oh my God.
Right?
And like Daedalus,
Right?
which is such a, like, especially there's been such a trend of disability, like activism and scholars thinking about Hephaestus. And like Daedalus is the mortal Hephaestus. And to be thinking about like disability and creativity. And I had a student who wrote a thesis last year on disability gain theory, and all of like, I was seeing so much of that in like the casting of Daedalus as well. And like, there's, I mean, we could talk for so much longer about this, and maybe Camus will let us.
Camus better let us.
Honestly, if Camus doesn't like officially give us a spot, I'm just gonna like demand that all of my friends come to a bar and like we'll just talk about KAOS there.
Yeah,
and it'll be an unofficial.
Perfect.
We'll bring the microphones. We'll record it.
Pull the wedding singer. I have the microphone, so you have to listen to everything I have to say. I will say, like, to end up, like, I wish there should be more shows like this. Like, my grievances aside, this is the kind of thing I do want to see a lot more of for all of the reasons we've just discussed. And yeah, that it's not just another Game of Thrones wannabe.
Yes.
Yeah, like it took swings. Like it took swings for the fences. And, you know, some of us think it connected to really just lean into this baseball metaphor. Like whether or not we think that all of their big swings connected for home runs, like they did things, right? Like they took chances. It wasn't a like, everyone's wearing togas. And it was one of these, like, we're going to take some bold interpretive choices. We're going to take some like, really go for it. And I would love to see more of that, because
for sure.
There's so much to discuss. There's so much to talk about. There's so much to think about. And like, it's just, God, this is the douchiest academic thing to say, but it's a rich text. It's very good to think with. But like, it is like,
this passage is purple.
well, like I could design an entire Greek myth class around this as a core text, and then like let's go dig into what are these things talking about. Let's read the source text. Let's talk about interpretive choices. Like you could do an entire Greek myth class that way.
You
easily,
could.
yeah.
And like it is just.
I am kind of gutted that I'm not teaching myth.
I'm teaching it right now, but it's too late to swerve out. So
Sure.
Damn the syllabi.
Damn the syllabi.
All right. Okay, I'm going to say it. Special thanks to Amy Pistone for demanding that we cover this sooner rather than later. Much appreciated.
Thanks for keeping us honest.
Yeah.
Thank you for letting me be the person to talk. Like I said, I was so excited. I was like, oh, I'm sure someone's already called it, but I hope they haven't, because I really want to talk about this.
Yeah. So if people want to learn more about you, Amy, where can they find you?
My personal website is amypistone.com, which is very easy to locate. And there I will soon be uploading my stuff about lesbian and Amazons and other stuff. So like that will be, once I update it, which should happen soon, that'll be a very nice landing place where you could see all of my other thoughts I have at great length about tragedy and or just listen to other episodes I've done with you guys, because it's super fun and I really like talking to you guys about things.
Yay. We love talking to you too. So hopefully we get to do it again.
Yes.
Yes.
All right. And finally, a special thanks to all you listeners. We could not produce episodes like this without your support. Please be sure to please be sure to rate, review, and subscribe if you like what you hear. You can find all our episodes at movieswedig.com or wherever you get your podcasts. If you want to know more about our upcoming plans and episode releases, be sure to follow us on social media, where you can find us under the handle of @digmovies or some variation of @movieswedig. We'll talk to you again soon. Yasas!
Yes.
Yes.